Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you and welcome to today's presentation on disability history and the Americans with Disabilities Act. This is a special presentation for the ADA anniversary. We just wanted to give you a quick overview of how today's presentation will go. There will be time for questions and answers for today's presentation. To submit your questions, you will be able to type into the chat window of Zoom. To access Zoom, you can either click on the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom window, or if you prefer to use keystrokes, you can do Alt plus H, and you'll be able to type in the chat. Where there will be time that prompted for questions and answers from our presenters, and we will address them by having our moderator reading it out loud, and then it will be answered by our presenters. All right, Jan, I think you are good to, Jan and Sonia, you are good to go whenever you're ready.
Wonderful. And I think we'll let Sonia start. Go right ahead, Sonia.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Today we'll be presenting on disability history and the Americans with Disability Act.
Next slide. So Sonia, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sonia. I have dark brown curly hair and tan skin and rose-tinted glasses. And this summer, I'm the intern at the Pacific ADA Center, and I'm a high school student who's personally interested in disability justice and activism.
Great. Thanks, Sonia. And I'm Jan Garrett. I'm the Deputy Director of the Pacific ADA Center and the Center on Disability. And I am a lifelong disability rights activist. I am somebody with a lived experience of disability. I was born with missing all four of my limbs, and I use a power wheelchair for mobility. So it's really great to have all of you on our webinar today. Hello to the people that I know and hello to the people that I don't know. And we're really happy that all of you joined us for this ADA anniversary week. So I'm going to pass it back to Sonia to go to the next slide.
Today, we're here to celebrate the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. Something that is important to note about the ADA is that it is a civil rights law, just like the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And a civil rights law gives equal protection under the law and equal opportunities to participate in the community. And in 2 days, it's the 24th today, and it'll be the 26th, we will celebrate the 34th anniversary. Now to talk about what life was like before the ADA.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, yeah, I just wanted to say, so the ADA is kind of in its almost mid-30s and, still young and vibrant, but also, it's been around a while and should have be really complied with probably more than it is. But at any rate, we're here to kind of talk a little bit about the history, about what's going on right now, and about the future. And Sonia is definitely a representation of the future of disability and the ADA and civil rights. So in the past, there was a history of segregation and discrimination. And this photo by Tom Olin, who is so beloved and so well known as a photographer of the disability rights movement, is showing a number of people with and without disabilities in a big protest march. And several people are in wheelchairs. Some people have service animals. And there is one sign that you can see that somebody's holding that says, "We shall overcome." So that's kind of the civil rights movement anthem from the 1960s. And it's also one that the disability community adopted as well, as we have sought our civil rights over time. So this has kind of been our history, segregation and discrimination. Next slide. So what do we mean by segregation? People with disabilities faced segregation or being separated from others without disability throughout history, really throughout until the 1970s, when things kind of began to shift and change. And people with all different types of disabilities often had to go to different schools. even like ride a different school bus. All of those things they had to do differently. They also had to work in different jobs if they were allowed to work at all, and they had to ride different buses, whether those are full buses or the small bus for the IDEA. So it's important to understand that people faced segregation in a variety of ways in the past. Next slide. So, as opposed to the daily segregation people experienced before, long-term segregation was also a huge issue. It's still potentially an issue even today, but certainly was worse before the Rehabilitation Act, was worse before the ADA, and that is that people with disabilities and of course older adults are segregated to places like nursing homes, psychiatric facilities, institutions for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And these types of places have been used to really isolate people and not let people participate in their communities, not let people be part of the community. And often people do need services and support to live independently and successfully in the community. And we're going to talk about that in a little while. But there was no services or support to be able to live in the community. It was all just money and power that was directed toward nursing homes and institutions in the past. Next slide.
Examples of inaccessible barriers physically is stuff, as Jan mentioned, buses or buildings, sidewalks, businesses, housing that people couldn't access because of multiple reasons because of their disability. Next slide. Discrimination before the ADA is across many realms, and it can mean unequal access in employment, education, housing, healthcare, voting, and so much more. Next slide.
Okay. So we've already talked about a little bit all these different areas where people face discrimination, face segregation. And what started to happen right after the civil rights movement and the women's movement was that people with disabilities saw that. They saw those movements and they said, we need a movement as well. So a lot of people with disabilities, especially in the bigger cities across the country, started to gather together, started to form coalitions, some loose coalitions, some more formal coalitions, and started to work as activists with disabilities to actually make a better world for people with disabilities. And this photo by Anthony Tesler is showing that people with disabilities actually in the city of San Francisco, I believe is where this is, in front of the city hall. And this was where the health and health education and welfare building was, where the whole 504 demonstrations happened. And so this is showing a bunch of people in front
Hey,
of that
hi,
area.
Jan. Let's
Oh,
pause for one moment. It looks like the captioning was accidentally sent to the chat. We just want to make sure everything is back. Oh, looks like we're good. All right, you're good to go again.
okay. So these are people that are in the plaza in San Francisco near the health education and welfare building. Some people in wheelchairs, some people not in wheelchairs. And again, one poster that I see says equal opportunity, another says we shall overcome. So it's important that this was kind of the beginning of the work of disabled activists and allies, not just those with disabilities, but there were many allies. There were many other people that were part of the disability rights movement that were starting to say, hey, we have civil rights as well, but we're not actually being heard. We're not being given our rights to access our community, education, employment, etc. And we want those rights as well. So protests started to happen, and both activists and allies started to demand more equal opportunity. Next slide.
One impactful moment during the disability rights movement was in 1972. So in 1972, news coverage and investigative reporting shined a light on the horrific conditions that come with institutionalization. Willowbrook, the largest state institution at the time, uh, was revealed to neglect the people inside, force separation from family and community, and there was physical and sexual abuse happening. This forced our society across America to reckon with what institutionalization meant and what it meant for the only option for disabled people to be an institution. Additionally, Willowbrook had questionable medical practices, was 2,000 people over capacity, and unethically, without consent, exposed disabled kids to hepatitis B for experiments. But the story about Willowbrook doesn't end in 1972. Actually, in 2020, the New York Times study found that survivors still face abuse in small homes. And this goes on to continuing ongoing issues in the disability rights movement, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But something that I want you, as people participating in the webinar, is to think about how does Willowbrook represent the greater story of institutionalization? Below is a photo by William Bronston, who did lots of photos of Willowbrook. And there's kids, multiple to a bed, left half clothed and without like entertainment, just kind of it's disorganized. And that just shows the issues that come with institutionalization.
Yeah, I think they were little kids. They were in carts that the staff could just wheel around easily. But they didn't often they weren't able to use the bathroom. They were left wet and soiled, and they were just left to essentially rot in these carts within Willowbrook. And I also wanted to say that Willowbrook was in New York, and was exposed. And it certainly wasn't the only institution that was like this. But if people want to put in the chat, like Sonia was saying, how does Willowbrook represent the greater story of institutionalization that maybe you know about? We'd love to hear some of your thoughts on that in the chat as well.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So in 1973, the first civil rights protection or acknowledgement of the rights of disabled people was passed in the 504 Rehabilitation Act. However, 504 was not actually being implemented, and individuals with disabilities demanded that they see implementation and enforcement of their rights. They did this by occupying federal buildings across the country, namely San Francisco, which was the largest and lasted 25 days, which is the longest peaceful occupation of a federal building. In fact, in San Francisco, the people occupying the federal building were helped by the Black Panther Party. And this will tie into other intersectionality things we'll talk about later. So the occupation was seen nationwide, and this forced people in government to pass regulation that enabled 504 to be better implemented. This is just one example of the activist spirit during the disability rights movement, and we would love to hear in the chat how you see this same activist spirit in present-day in this present-day disabled movement.
And
Next.
do we want to say in the photo?
Oh, yes. In the photo, this one is taken by Jim Palmer. It is a really crowded room. And there's a ton of people in wheelchairs, and they're centered around a speaker and a cameraman. And they are all listening, and it's a kind of wide array of people, like racially, that are listening to the speaker in the federal building in San Francisco.
Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify a little bit. So the Rehabilitation Act was actually passed as a law in 1973, but the regulations that actually tell you how to implement the law, like Sonia was saying, how do you actually make the law real? How do you make people comply with the law? How do they know when they're complying with the law? That's what regulations do. And so the regulations were being allowed to just languish. Um, and so, what happened was is that the people with disabilities wanted to protest and say, we want the regulations implemented and signed and become real, because otherwise the Rehabilitation Act really meant nothing if the regulations weren't implemented, because nobody was complying with the law, even though it was signed. The Rehabilitation Act was signed in 1973. So that's why these protests were really necessary, and that's kind of what the whole thing was about. Should we go to the next
Next,
one?
yeah.
Okay, so also in the late 70s, on July 5th, right after our nation's Independence Day, people with disabilities had an Independence Day of sorts in 1978, and 19 protesters stopped traffic by lying down on the street in front of buses and in front of other cars. Um, this picture by Glenn Martin shows people lying on the street in front of a big city bus, and it also the bus has some signs under the windshield wipers about like no taxation without representation, and that meaning that people with disabilities were not being represented. And you can also see like a wheelchair abandoned by its user kind of across the street, where there are some sawhorses, so that somebody actually got out of their wheelchair and crawled over onto the street in front of the bus. And these protesters were ADAPT protesters, and that meant that they wanted public transportation to be accessible. They also protested later for Greyhound, which is a private transportation company accessibility. And so all of this was pushing for more accessibility, or any accessibility of public transportation, because there just wasn't any at all in the 1970s. And people were pushing for that all over the country. That was being so this was well before the ADA, but people were pushing for that to be added, because all of these cities that had public transportation companies, they all received federal money. So this was that Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act says if you receive federal money, you cannot discriminate against people with disabilities. You have to give people an opportunity, an equal opportunity. You have to provide accessibility to your programs and services. And so, even before the ADA, 504, once it was implemented, said, hey, cities and counties that have transportation and other services, you have to do this, and you have to make transportation and buildings and sidewalks and other things accessible. And yes, I see somebody posted in the chat. This was really the birth of ADAPT in the late 1970s. And ADAPT is still going strong, and still many people from ADAPT protest pretty much all the time about lack of accessibility.
Yes, and I see also a question in the chat about where this photo was taken. This was in Denver. I think a lot of the protesting on the street, like Jan talked about, started in Colorado.
It did. It started in Denver. Yeah, but spread throughout the country.
Yeah.
Next slide. So another decision that kind of came about, remember we talked a little bit before about how segregation really kept people from accessing their community. People were either in the backs of their families' houses, or they were in institutions. They couldn't actually be on the sidewalks. They couldn't go to, be entertainment. They couldn't go to recreation or parks. They couldn't go to any of these places. And so but what was still happening, even once the ADA passed, was that the ADA Title II, which was supposed to give access to the programs and services of states, cities, and counties, in other words, ADA Title II public entities, that still wasn't happening. States in particular were still funneling money, mostly diverting money for intended for people with disabilities, to institutions, to nursing homes, instead of putting it in the community to allow people to move into the community with services and supports that they needed, and accessibility that they needed in order to do that. And so that's really where the Olmstead decision came about. And that was passed in June of 1999. This year, in addition to being the 34th anniversary of the ADA, is also the 25th anniversary of the Olmstead decision, which was a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court that said it was against Georgia, specifically the state of Georgia, and two women brought it. And the Supreme Court said you cannot simply just divert money toward institutions. You have to actually make some money be available for services and supports in the community so that people with disabilities can have access to their community, can have equal opportunity. And so that was really what the Olmstead case was about. And this is the 25th anniversary of the Olmstead case. Okay. And this is a photo showing several different people. They all are holding up a sign that says, I am Olmstead. All of them have basically mobility disabilities. They use wheelchairs, or some don't, but most of them do use wheelchairs, and others are standing holding I am Olmstead signs under some trees.
And I Am Olmstead was a internet campaign to show the array of people that were able to live more independently in the community as a result of the Olmstead decision.
Yeah. And remember that this could be people with visible disabilities. It could be people with non-apparent or invisible disabilities. It could be people with mental health disabilities, developmental disabilities that are not always obvious. So it's really was meant for everyone to be able to have the services and supports they needed to live in the community. In fact, Lois Curtis, one of the people in the Olmstead case, one of the main plaintiffs, was somebody with a disability that you could not see. And Lois's doctors had said that she was perfectly capable of living in the community, but the state of Georgia wouldn't allow her to do so until there was a case that went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court finally said to states across the country, you have to develop plans so that people can live in the community. And still today, a lot of states are kind of struggling with their Olmstead plans to make sure that people with disabilities can live in the community successfully. Next slide. So the ADA actually, Olmstead kind of came after the ADA, but the ADA actually was passed in July 26th of 1990. So that's why Friday is the anniversary. And it is one of many disability rights laws, obviously, in addition to the Rehabilitation Act, the Fair Housing Act, included people with disabilities. And others, but the ADA has the broadest impact. It covers the most types of organizations and entities because it covers not only state and local governments, but it covers businesses and nonprofits. Um, and it covers telecommunications. And so it covers many, many different areas, and it applies to a wide variety of people with disabilities that have apparent disabilities, non-apparent disabilities, many, many types of disabilities. And in fact, the ADA was amended in 2008, and that took effect in 2009 because the Supreme Court at that point was also saying, and Congress was saying, basically, you're not really including enough people with disabilities. The courts were saying, we're making decisions to say, oh, this person isn't covered as somebody with a disability. They're not covered by the ADA. And Congress in the late 2000s said that is not what we meant. We intended for a wide variety of people to be covered by the ADA. And we want to amend it to make that clear. So they actually changed the definition of disability to try to clarify and try to make it clear that a wide variety of people should be covered by the ADA definition of disability, and that stands today. And this shows a photograph, a very, very famous photograph of President George H.W. Bush signing the ADA into law on the White House lawn on a very hot July 26, 1990, surrounded by many disability advocates who are often very, very famous, especially the guy in the cowboy hat is Justin Dart, who many of you know, and the guy on the left, on our left of H.W. Bush is is Evan Kemp. And so these were people that were very, very instrumental in getting the ADA passed. There is obviously much more work to do, even though the ADA has done a lot for us. And I personally can tell a difference between where things were before the ADA and where things are now. There is still a lot of work to do in enforcement and achieving equity and equal opportunity for people with all types of disabilities. Next slide.
Yes, and so we get into the continued fight, as Jan was alluding to in this section, because so much is still happening in the disability rights movement. It was not just something that happened in the 1970s. It is a very alive, very vibrant fight. So in this photo, we have a Black man and he's holding "Nothing about us without us." I chose this photo specifically because I think it's a very powerful phrase that talks about how when we give more rights to disabled people, we need to make sure that disabled people are writing that legislation, and so it's actually intended to truly help the community.
Yeah, that people with disabilities are giving input into what's happening, not just being shunned aside and other people actually saying what's good for us.
Exactly. Next slide, please. And part of understanding where the disability movement is going is to understand intersectionality. Disability is not just an identity on its own, but it's impacted by all sorts of other identities. People of all ages, ethnicities, races, religions, genders, sexual orientations, and more have disabilities. And when you combine multiple discriminated against identities, it can lead to more difficult barriers. For example, if you are Black and disabled, American Public Health Association reports that more than half Black disabled people have been arrested by the time they're 28, which is a very stark fact. And disability and other marginalized identities can lead to being more susceptible to larger ideas such as poverty as well. Or, like I said, incarceration. Next slide, please.
Okay, so there's ongoing issues in a wide variety of areas. Obviously, all areas that are touched by the ADA, and the ADA touches pretty much all areas of life. But in terms of education, K through 12 education in particular, but also higher education, general education teachers need training on disabilities. That's just kind of generally true. They do not understand disabilities. They do not understand how to teach kids with disabilities that may be fully included or partially included in their classrooms. And the fact that they don't have training means that it is really difficult for them to even know whether or not they're discriminating. They may not intend to discriminate, but they kind of are developing ableist attitudes in the classroom that they don't even realize are there. And so everybody, higher education and K through 12 teachers need training on disability. Also, students don't have enough supports and services. Now, K through 12, if you're covered by the IDEA, you are supposed to have supports and services, but a lot of school districts, it's a real fight to make sure that you have an IEP, an individualized education plan, and that that is actually being followed by the school and by the teachers, et cetera. And so that's supposed to, in addition to having appropriate education, it's supposed to have supports and services provided as well. But a lot of students still don't have those supports and services. And then once you get to higher education, you often will have a disabled students program, but you still lack a lot of supports and services that people with disabilities need in order to be successful in higher education as well. Then also in K through 12, there are a lot of suspensions and people who are expelled, even though they should not be. There's also a lot of restraint and seclusion among youth with disabilities. They're put in areas where they're secluded and they're not allowed to, be part of the educational process. And then certificate tracks instead of diploma tracks can make employment challenging and difficult. Okay. So this is kind of an ongoing education issue. Next slide. So for employment, um, there's a lot of stigma and discriminatory attitudes about employment. And frankly, I think that's mostly why more people with disabilities are not employed. Because I feel like there are a lot of employers out there, whether they're government employers or private business employers or private nonprofit employers, that are really have a big misunderstanding about disability. They're frankly afraid to hire a lot of people with disabilities. They're afraid of what they will have to do as reasonable accommodations, even though study after study has shown that most reasonable accommodations cost nothing, and those that do cost something actually get are a very low cost. Also, employers often assume that people with disabilities will only be able to do certain jobs, even though they could do lots of different jobs if they had the right accommodations. Um, Also, they might be considered a liability in the workplace. Oh, they're a fire hazard. I can't tell you how many times I've been called a fire hazard for various reasons. I feel like I should maybe spontaneously combust or something as a fire hazard. But at people with disabilities should not be considered a liability at an employer. And I think employers think once they hire somebody with a disability, they can never fire them, even if they aren't performing the job. And the truth is, if you give them the accommodations to perform the essential functions of their job and they are qualified to perform the job, then they should be able to perform the job. And if they are not, you do not have to allow them to remain in the job if you have given them the accommodations. And if they are not still performing, you can actually terminate those employees. But you need to be clear about what accommodations you are giving and what people need before that happens. And that should be true with any employee, whether they have a disability or not. Before you terminate someone, you should be going through and making sure you have done everything you can, that you have talked with them, that you have provided them with what they need to do their job. There's also a lack of understanding and training, again, about the ADA. Hiring managers are not trained. Sometimes HR professionals are trained, sometimes they're not. Sometimes in small employers, there is no human resource or HR department. There's just a few people working there, and those people are not trained in the ADA and about hiring people with disabilities. Most employers in this country are small businesses and they are not trained. And we know that some employers are still paying a sub minimum wage. They're paying essentially a wages for piecework and not allowing people to kind of move up and be paid at least a minimum wage. And this is actually still allowed to pay somebody a sub minimum wage when they have a disability in most states. Not every state, but most states still allow this. And this needs to be changed and have people make at least minimum wage and certainly be paid fairly compared to the other workers that are there that are doing the same job. And there's also a very large employment gap as well. And so I wanted to look at these statistics. So for participation in the labor force, so for people without disabilities, labor force participation approximately right now in 2024 is just over 60%. But for people with disabilities, participation in the labor force is only 24.5%. So that's a really significant difference in terms of labor force participation. Even though a lot of people actually stopped participation in the labor force during COVID and haven't re-entered the workforce. But for people with disabilities, it's a really big gap. in what people are able to do. And so I'm very unusual in being employed my whole life as somebody with a disability. I'm very, very fortunate in that respect. Next slide. So let's see. There's also ongoing issues for housing. Now, most housing, keep in mind, is not covered by the ADA unless it's actually sold or managed by a state or local government. Housing is mostly covered by the Fair Housing Act if it's multifamily housing. Okay, that means at least 3 or more units, or in California, 4 or more units in the country at large. But housing often is not accessible. Even new housing sometimes that's built is not following the requirements for design and accessibility from the Fair Housing Act, or from the ADA if it's ADA covered housing. It's also not affordable. And this is generally true. A lot of housing is not affordable across the United States for anyone, but certainly for people with disabilities who we know, from our just we're talking about, are not in the workforce as much as people without disabilities. They may be living on SSI or SSDI. They often are living in poverty. For people with disabilities, therefore, housing affordability is even worse than it is for the public at large. And it is already really bad, particularly in the Bay Area where Sonia and I are, but across the country as well. And what people risk without accessible, affordable housing is that they will have to live in institutions. They will have to be in nursing homes or what they call skilled nursing facilities. I don't know what skill there is often, but I'll leave that to somebody else to decide that. Um, and or they're living in psychiatric institutions, or facilities for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and they don't have adequate support to transition to the community. Now, that is supposed to be something that centers for independent living do. Transition services are core to centers for independent living, which are organizations run by and for people with disabilities. And there are many centers for independent living across the country. They started in Berkeley, where I am, the first center for independent living, and then spread nationwide. But all centers for independent living should be trying to help people and are supposed to be trying to help people transition from institutional living to the community. But they can only do that if the housing stock is available and it's affordable for people to be able to move into. Next slide. And there's also, in addition to housing and employment and many other areas, also just facility access of being able to go to stores and access your community, do recreation. There's also lack of accessibility in healthcare. A lot of healthcare professionals are not trained on disability awareness or how to serve people with disabilities, a variety of disabilities. There's not training on providing sign language interpreters, for example, in healthcare. There's not training on helping people transfer over to the medical equipment, or there's not accessible medical equipment that is diagnostic equipment or exam tables to be able to examine people. And there's just this whole lack of training and understanding about disability in the healthcare industry. There's also a lack of accessibility in a lot of doctors' offices and clinics. And then there's also, institutionalization here again in healthcare. And people really need the ability to age in place in their own homes so they don't have to go to a nursing home. And, we saw how terrible nursing homes can be during COVID, where the vast majority of the people who died during COVID actually died in nursing homes because it spread like wildfire. And so a pandemic is something that can kill so many different people in nursing homes. And that's why people need to be able to have affordable, accessible housing, need to be able to live in their communities, and be able to access the services and supports they need, whether that might be attendant care or accessible housing, et cetera, to live in their communities. Next slide.
So, moving a little bit away from ongoing issues, where is the future of the disability rights movement? What can we expect to see? And how can you be part of it? In this image, we have people protesting, saying disability rights are human rights, and they're in like some sort of political office, I assume maybe in the Capitol, and they are asking for us to get those human rights, and we'll talk a bit more about that. Next slide. So, what is disability justice? You might have heard this term maybe mentioned earlier or in other areas. And disability rights and disability justice is a little bit different. So, disability justice is this new term that people are starting to use to talk about enabling more civil rights for people and that community movement in the disabled community. And so, disability justice acknowledges different privileges within the disabled community. It looks at how disability and ableism relate to other forms of oppression. For example, someone who is white and disabled would have a racial privilege or maybe a societal privilege as opposed to someone who is Latino and disabled. And understanding the nuance of other identities and disability allows us to have a range of perspectives. If we acknowledge the differences, but we work together, we can resist together, and be united in that resistance. Finally, interdependence. So another term for what happened in the 70s is the independent living movement. And the independent living movement is the idea that disabled people can live independently. And that's totally true. But it's also true that disabled people don't have to live independently and be invalid, right? You can live dependently and still fight. So, interdependence being reliant on people within your community, but still working together to fight for the greater cause of more civil rights for disabled people. Next slide, please. Next slide.
No, I think this is it.
Oh, okay. So I don't, sorry. Where do we go next? So what is disability justice? What does the future look like? Well, that can be, as kind of Jan talked about, continued community education and awareness. And that can be in all the different forms that she talked about, education, healthcare, housing, etc. And it also can come from you. You can educate your community and you're starting now by going to a webinar like this. And transparency. So this is a bit more of a tricky one, but understanding what the government actions are for people for people with disabilities can help you understand your rights. And also what's currently happening in the government and how that impacts you. So on the next slide, we'll talk about how you can find that out. So there are resources that you can go to if you would like to learn more about things happening in policy that impact you. So you can go to the National Council on Independent Living at advocacymonitor.com. Or you could go to the National Disability Rights Network at www.ndrn.org /issues /ADA civil rights civil rights /. And you can go to Autistic Self-Advocacy Network at autisticadvocacy.org /policy /action /. And I see some people asking in the chat whether you'll get access to these slides. You will. And so if you can't remember all that, you can just look at the slides.
Yeah, and those are actually forward slashes. Sorry to interrupt you, Sonia.
Oh,
That's
sorry,
okay.
my bad.
That's okay.
So one final bit. Next slide, please. So once again, going to you guys and hearing your thoughts. What are things you are celebrating this ADA 34? And what do you wish to see in the future? We've seen some of the things in the chat, but we'd love to hear some more. And after that, you can, if you have some of those questions and you want those to be answered out loud, we'll move it towards that.
Yeah, and we have plenty of time, actually. We move through the slides pretty quickly. And so we can actually, Gabe can help us know what's already in the chat to discuss, but then we can have some other discussion.
All right. Thank you very much, Jan and Sonia. That was an excellent presentation. As a reminder to our audience, you can submit any questions or comments that you would like in the webinar chat. It is visible to our panelists. If you would like a reminder on how to access the chat, you can move to the bottom of your Zoom window and click on the chat button. Or if you prefer to use keystrokes, it is Alt plus H to open the chat window. We will be going through the chat. I will be reading it out loud and then allowing our presenters to address any questions that came up. All right, one moment, please, while I find our first question. Here's our first question here. It says, why is it so harder for people to implement and enforce to comply, especially all federal agencies in a state where people have a mindset in state laws, for instance, Texas? Why is this so difficult?
Why is enforcement so difficult is kind of the bottom line, do you think, Gabe, for that?
I think so. Yeah, I think if you would like to restate your question, if we are interpreting it wrong, please go ahead and put it back in the chat. But it looks like this is asking, why is enforcement so difficult?
Well, I mean, Sonia can weigh in too, but I mean, I just think part of it is kind of how the ADA was set up, and a lot of civil rights laws are set up this way, where the individuals that are covered by the law actually have to be the ones to enforce it. I know Department of Justice does, and Department of Transportation and Department of Education. They do some reaching out and enforcement on their own, but basically they do that based on complaints that they receive from the disability community or from the other civil rights communities. And so I think it's really difficult because it puts, in particular, the disability rights laws, it puts people with disabilities in a bad position to have to be the ones to always, say, this is happening to me. I want enforcement. And the Department of Justice can't possibly enforce all the things that are happening to people across the country, can't possibly bring suits. All they can do is bring, big kind of settlements to send a message. But the truth is that there are still problems out there. And so, I feel like I don't know what the answer is to do better enforcement. Sometimes you can go to your state office for civil rights, your state attorney general. I know in California, there's a civil rights department. Sometimes you can get faster action and more complete action by going to your state civil rights department or your state attorney general. But, even though the Department of Justice is wonderful, the Department of Transportation, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, so many different federal agencies are really great and are really there for the disability community, but it's just impossible for them to really do full-throated enforcement.
Yeah, and I see someone mention in the chat local legislators. I think going to people in your government and talking about your concerns, um, hopefully their door is always opened to hear from you, and that is a way too that you can get your thoughts across.
Okay, that sounds great. So
All right, next question. Uh, this one is from a attendee that is interested in the work of people who had AIDS in the disability rights movement. If there's any sort of information or history that you can speak on there.
well, there definitely is history. And when the ADA was being considered in the late 80s, it was a broad coalition of people with disabilities that were pushing to get the law passed as well. And there were a lot of Congress people who said, I don't think we should include people with HIV or AIDS in the ADA, that's politically bad. I don't think we should do that. And the disability community at large, as a whole, almost everyone said, absolutely, we must have people with HIV and AIDS in the ADA. We will not exclude them. It is critical to make sure that they have civil rights as well. So yes, people with HIV from the beginning and to this day are considered people with disabilities.
Yes, and as I talked about earlier with intersectionality, there's movement to acknowledge the intersection of the LGBTQ community who was affected a lot by the AIDS epidemic, and also the disabled community. And so people within the LGBTQ community were important advocates in the disability rights movement to this day.
And that is an excellent segue because the next question is about intersectionality. This attendee is asking if we can provide the intersectionality reference on interface with the police in the chat, or if we have a place where they can go and see that.
Sorry, Gabe, are you asking like where it came from?
Uh, yeah, if you can give us a kind of idea of what you're asking for here, we will move on to the next question, and then we'll get back to this question when we loop back around.
Yeah. And sorry, just if in cases what the person is asking, I was reading different articles. The specific one that said that statistic that half of Black disabled people have been arrested by the time they're 28 was in the Public Health Association, American Public Health Association.
Okay, APHA. Okay. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of statistics out there on different areas. So, okay. So, next one, Gabe.
All right. This question is in regards to the discussion about certificate tracks instead of a diploma for employment. They want to know if you can speak on vocational schools that can help people with with disabilities find areas of interest that can turn into employment opportunities through trade schools.
Well, I mean, that's certainly available. Trade schools or vocational schools are certainly available to people with that and without disabilities. If people with disabilities want to go to four-year colleges and universities, they should have that opportunity. If they would prefer to go to a vocational school, they should have that opportunity as well. And I think the vocational schools can reach out to, high school students and say, this is what we're offering for high school students with and without disabilities, to be able to, take advantage of maybe trades that they might be interested in. But I don't think people with disabilities should all be just shuttled to trade schools. It should be based on what people want to do with the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and making those education opportunities beyond high school more accessible is something I hope to see in the future. Answering the question.
But people certainly can learn valuable trades and skills in vocational schools. And don't forget employers that Voc Rehab is out there, and not everyone is a client of Voc Rehab that may be applying for jobs that has a disability. But if they are, a lot of times Voc Rehab can kind of bridge that gap with assistive technology and other kinds of supports for a while somebody is relatively new on the job. So remember that that's an opportunity. Reach out to your Voc Rehab agency at your state, and there are many local offices throughout the country as well. And make sure that you're tapping into that resource for employing people with disabilities out there. And I did want to quickly say there was somebody who posted something in the chat that yes, labor participation did improve during COVID for people with disabilities because a lot of employers saw that you could actually employ people and that they could work remotely, and that could still be successful because almost everyone worked remotely during COVID. That wasn't true of everybody. There were people who had to work in person, and those people were more at risk, of course, than the people who could work remotely. But a lot of employers did see that opportunity and now see that it can be offered as a reasonable accommodation, even if you want to require that people come in once a week or something like that to make sure people are still, communing, still connecting with their coworkers. And also, I just want to make the point that people with disabilities shouldn't be, it shouldn't be assumed that people with disabilities want to work from home. Some people want to work on the job. And, but if they do want to work from home or do need to work from home because of a particular disability, that should be available as an option in almost every job situation. It just depends on the job.
Thank you for that, Jan. Um, this next couple of questions are all very similar. They're just asking more about are the slides going to be made available? Is the video going to be made available? So I just wanted to take a moment. I can answer this one myself. Uh, we will make the slides available to all attendees who have attended today's presentation. We will also be uploading this video to the Pacific ADA Center YouTube page. We will send out an email with the slides for download and a link to the video when they are ready. They will likely be up and ready early next week. Thank you. We also have a couple of questions here, Jan, about more individual issues or specific questions about the ADA. If you wanted to speak about the ADA National Network as a resource for our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you have kind of a specific fact situation that you want to explore with somebody who knows more about the law, whether that's the ADA or perhaps another law that might cover the situation that you're not aware of, please do contact the ADA National Network. And if we go to the next slide, I think at least some of our contact information will also be relevant to the ADA National Network. So the toll free number is the same across the country, no matter what region you're in for the ADA National Network. The Pacific ADA Center happens to be in Region 9 of the ADA National Network, which covers Arizona, Nevada, California, Hawaii, and the Pacific Basin. But the truth is every single state and territory across the country is covered by the ADA National Network. And you can go to 1-800 949 4232. Again, 1-800 949 4232. And that is voice and relay. And you will reach the ADA center that corresponds to your area code from the phone you're calling from. So if you've moved and you have an area code from across the country, it's going to give you the ADA center for the area code you have. However, if you need a different ADA center because you're now living in a different state or area, we all work together as the ADA National Network, and that ADA Center can absolutely refer you to the direct number for the ADA Center in the area where you live. Also, you can always contact the Pacific ADA Center for individual questions, or even if you live in another region, and we'll get you to the right place. You can email us at info@adapacific.org. You can check out our website at adapacific.org. We have worked really hard on that over the last year, and it's very in very plain language. And we hope it's easy to navigate. We have tried to make it so, but we would always appreciate feedback if you have that for us on our website. So please explore that and explore some of the resources that we have there. We also encourage you to join our mailing list, our email list, and that's at adapacific.org/subscribe. So, and it's also on our homepage. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the ability to join our email list. And we do send out a monthly newsletter that has a lot of great information in it and a lot of great training that you can share with folks that either we do or other ADA National Network centers do, or the US government does. So we put out a lot of information every month. And we also have our own other webinars. We have sort of the ADA civil rights series of webinars, and we have two more of those left for 2024 in September and December. And then we also have healthcare in the ADA webinars, and we have one of those coming up as well. And those are all free webinars that you can feel free to sign up for and learn more about the ADA in different specific areas.
Yeah.
So
And
that might help. Yeah.
to reiterate what you're saying, I still see some more like personal questions or, wonderings of is what I'm experiencing like allowed under the ADA? Is this legal? Like how can I get help? Like my employer's doing something to me that, doesn't feel legal. We are here to answer those questions for you. Don't worry, or to refer you to the person that can help you, get legal backing. So please, call or email us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to because they often these questions involve very personal details, very kind of private details. It's not really appropriate for us to answer those kinds of questions in a webinar, but we and our sister centers at the ADA National Network absolutely are happy to help you with individualized questions.
Thank you very much for that. This next series of questions are all interconnected. They're on the topic of trainings, advocacy, and whatnot. So the general gist of these questions are that they think that training would open up a lot of doors for a lot of people. What advocacy is being done around providing more training on the ADA and disability rights?
Well, funnily enough, you are looking at someone that does training on the ADA. Here at the Pacific ADA, we also provide some training. So if you or your like small business wants training, nonprofit, um, that most likely will be free, and otherwise at a small fee. Yeah.
Yeah, we typically do. We don't charge people with disabilities or small disability nonprofits typically for our trainings, but we do charge other entities for our trainings. It's a way that we raise fee for service money, but we do definitely can. We'd have reasonable prices, and we definitely can work with you on your budget as well, even if it's something that we do need to charge for. And
Mhm.
so we encourage you to contact us for training and that we can be able to provide for you.
Yeah, like I said earlier, we're here to answer your questions and help you and your possible business understand.
But we can't mandate that people do training. We have to have people come to us
Yeah.
and ask for training. The only time that training can actually be mandated is if there is a lawsuit, either a private lawsuit or a settlement with one of the federal agencies, and that settlement actually requires or that lawsuit requires training. And then that entity that's required to do training has to reach out and find someone who can do training. And I will just say that typically the ADA center in your area will often be the one that can help you with that training. But again, we can't really reach out and require training. Folks have to reach out to us in order to ask us to provide training, and then we can talk with you about that.
All right, these next couple of questions are all education related. This first one is asking for if you know any examples of outreach the ADA. See, let me reread this 1 second, please. Outreach examples of outreach for in regards to helping students of K through 12 in particular.
Sonia, did you want to? You're in K through 12. You're almost in 12. So did you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think that kind of as we're alluding to, advocacy can often be left to those from the disabled community or from nonprofits willing to help. So you will You're supposed to have someone there to help you as a disabled person, whether that's a like disability center or like a learning specialist. There's sometimes those provided at K through 12 schools um, to help students with disabilities. And if you're at a public school, there is regulation that requires you to have some rights, whether that is a I individualized learning plan or whether or it's like other forms to show your necessary accommodations.
Yeah, and you're required to get a free and appropriate public education. That's what the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act says. And sometimes that can apply to private schools and charter schools as well. But it definitely applies in public schools. So people with disabilities are entitled to a free and appropriate public education through IDEA. And then even if you're not among the different disabilities that are covered by the IDEA, because it covers specific disability groups, you can have a 504 plan, which is basically the same 504 we were talking about earlier, 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And so, you should either be entitled to an individualized education plan under the IDEA if you fit one of those disability groups, or you should be entitled to a 504 plan if you are a K through 12 student with a disability, and your school district should be complying with that requirement.
Yeah, and as Jan said earlier, to be completely honest, there are difficulties getting access to your individualized learning plan. I personally have experience with that, whether that's just a resistant school because those through like 504 and individualized learning plans, school has strict requirements on what they have to do. And so you can be met with a lot of resistance on getting access to those, but those are supposed to be available.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that are supposed to be available. I mean, what the ADA basically says is, you know, what does equal opportunity mean? What an IDEA says, what does free and appropriate public education mean? It's all kind of defined and it's an ideal. And this is what it's supposed to be have an equal opportunity to have employment, to access your community, to access your school and education. But unless the ideal is actually enforced and people are there saying, yes, we're going to comply with this, then it is just an ideal and it's not reality. And so, you unfortunately, as somebody with a disability or a family member of somebody with a disability or a friend, an activist, an ally of the disability community, it's up to all of us to sort of say, this is what the law says, this is civil rights law, we want it enforced, we need it enforced. It's important to our lives to be able to move forward. And it's important to the whole culture of the United States to have people with disabilities participate fully in life. And so, that's just makes us all richer if everyone can participate.
Yeah, and kind of if people with disabilities can participate or we get better access to jobs, that helps with the poverty, homelessness, housing crisis. So these all connect if we, create those opportunities for people with disabilities.
Yes. And Gabe, do we want to actually take? I mean, I think some people have had their hands up. I don't know if they still do.
I don't see any hands up right now. We have been getting a lot of questions in the chat though, and it's been consistently going. So I think probably best to keep going through the chat questions first.
Well, let's stop for just a second because I see Christine and then one other person raised their hands. So
Okay. Christine Fitzgerald, we see your hand is raised. We're going to allow you to unmute your question. In respect of everyone's time, if you can make sure, just go ahead and ask your question and then mute yourself afterwards. Then we'll move through everyone's raised hands as fast as we can. Okay,
All
you're
right,
unmuted
can
and
you
you're
hear me?
good to go.
yeah,
Can you hear me now?
I can.
All right, 25 words or less. Here we go. Um, Okay, so I know IDEA is there for K through 12, which is great. I'm wondering what the ADA does in concern with those in, say, junior colleges or private universities, because I know that, again, federal monies going to certain colleges have to comply, but I'm wondering about the private entities.
So I can answer this
Sure,
partially.
go ahead.
As someone who's going into college and, has to think about this, like I said, I talked a little bit about there's supposed to be disability centers there, and disability offices. And so usually those have some staffing that's there to help you, but usually in university, you'll have to go there and say and kind of bring evidence or explain like what your disabilities are and ask for the accommodations you need. So in unlike K through 12, it's a little less handheld and you have to kind of advocate yourself, unfortunately. And so you usually go to the disability center and you say, I need this, this, and this. And they say, okay, I can provide this, this, and this. And so it's usually more of a conversation with the disability center to see what they can provide.
Well, and also just to kind of follow up on that, private universities are covered by ADA Title III because they are considered public accommodations under ADA Title III. And so they are covered. They have reasonable modification requirements. They have effective communication requirements. They have equal opportunity requirements. And then Title II or public colleges and universities are covered by ADA Title II. So they are required to give access to their programs, services, and activities. So absolutely, both public and private colleges and universities are absolutely covered by the ADA, and almost all are also going to be covered by the Rehabilitation Act because almost all are going to receive financial aid money, most of which is federal money. So it's kind of an overlap of the Rehabilitation Act and ADA, either Title II or Title III. Okay.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for your question, Christine. We are going to uh, remove your ability to unmute and then move on to the next person. You can go ahead and lower your hand. If you have another question, Christine, you can raise your hand afterwards. Uh, Don Anderson, we see that you have well, we did see you with a raised hand, but it looks like you've lowered your hand. Oh, there you're back. We're going to allow you to unmute yourself, and you can go ahead and ask your question. Please, in the interest of getting as many questions in as possible, please make sure to ask your question and then mute yourself afterwards. You are good to unmute yourself now. You could.
Can everyone hear me?
There you
Yes.
go.
Hey, I wanted to just thank the Pacific ADA Center for presenting this very important information. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And then also just to mention, not really a question, but when we have people with disabilities representing our communities, then that is a form of mentorship too. And so it is really important that people with disabilities, for all the reasons that you mentioned, have equal access, but also are representing the communities themselves. That type of mentorship and face forward and public representation is super important, no matter what level of our culture. People with disabilities represent our interests.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dawn. Yeah. And both Sonia and I have disabilities. So, we're here to sort of represent, at least to the extent that we can, the disability community, at least from the understanding of our own disabilities. And the Pacific ADA Center has been so grateful to have Sonia as an intern and be able to offer her some mentorship and understanding of the ADA. And she's given us back so much as well. So it's been a great experience. I would encourage everybody to try to take on a mentee, be a mentor to young people with disabilities, and make sure that they have role models to look at and are, understand what's happening and give them real, things to do as part of an internship or a mentorship, to move forward.
Definitely.
Thank you for your question, Don. We are going to remove your ability to unmute and move on to the next person. Stephanie Norden, we see your raised hand. We are going to allow you to unmute. You are good to unmute and ask your question.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
I can. We can.
Hi. Well, you know what? This is an amazing celebration. 34 years is not a long time in the world of, civil rights movements. And I do think we've come really far. I don't have a question. I want to reiterate that uh, part of the regulatory, not the whole part of the law is covered, and there's a lot of enforcement issues. um, Please, whoever's on the line, go find out who your local legislator is. It's something we did last year in Florida. And just by telling your story, if you're an individual with disability or a family member, explain to them what are the complications, and if you have solutions, offer them. And I just really wanted to emphasize that because there's an algorithm. If we go into their office, that represents a certain amount of people in the area. If multiple people go into their offices, then change happens. And, just wanted to say that. Thank you so much for this webinar. It's been really helpful.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you very much for your comment. We are going to remove your ability to unmute and move on to the next person. All right. Paulette Hammonds, we are going to allow you to unmute. You can go ahead and ask your question in just one moment. Okay, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mine is not a question. I did put in the chat if you want to know more about the ADA, a background on the history. I represent FEMA, and our administrator has a book list. And one of the books that's on her book list is Being Human, an Unrepentant Memoir of a Disability Rights Activist by Judith Human and Christian Joyner. When I tell you I could not put that book down, and if you want to know more about what these two ladies talked about today, this will give you the background, the history, the involvement of Presidents Reagan, Bush, Clinton, and Obama's and their role, and Hillary Clinton. Anyone in this arena must read this book. You won't put it down. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulette. That was great. And we lost Judy Human. She was considered the mother of the disability rights movement, and we lost her in 2023. Unfortunately, she passed away. And it's a great book. It's called Being Human, Heumann. That's how you spell her last name. Judy Human, Heumann. And she is definitely somebody that paved the way for so many of us. And she's in almost all of the 504 demonstration pictures because she was there. She was testifying. She's in the film called The Power of 504. I encourage you to kind of seek that out if you can find it somewhere. So definitely pay attention to Judy and read her book. And there's other books by disability activists out there as well. If you want, a book list, you can also contact us, and we can have more books to share with you as well. But that's a great one, Paulette. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Paulette. We found your post here, so we're going to copy it to everyone so they can see the title of anyone else is interested in looking up that book. There you go. We posted it in the chat. Thank you very much. All right, we are going to remove your permission to unmute, and we're going to move on to the next person. Marcy Jackson, we see you there. We're going to allow you to unmute in just one moment. Okay, you can unmute and go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you. Like everyone else said, webinar was very helpful. I am in charge of a nonprofit on the East Coast, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Virginia area, and we advocate for Black students with special needs in particular because of the intersectionality difficulties that you mentioned regarding students with disabilities and the racialized disparity. And I'm so glad that you mentioned the importance of educating general education teachers and educating, general, more advocates, essentially, not necessarily maybe a professional by trade advocate, but just people to support those individuals who may have a difficult time advocating for themselves until such a time as they can. So I just wanted to thank you for bringing up those points. And I also wanted to add another reference to the book list, because of the intersectionality and the connections towards law enforcement that you mentioned in the criminal justice. The school to prison pipeline is very much something that we can, in the justice movement, try to address. And there's a new book called Pour the Water, and it's available on Amazon. I don't know how we can get it on your book list, but it's about transformative solutions for equity and justice in special education. Because as you mentioned, the resistance to IEPs, the resistance to 504 planning and all of that is so real. It's real for general public with disabilities. And then imagine you also are a victim of systemic racism because of your ethnicity. So I think it's just very important that we share all of this. So I just wanted to find out how we can add that book, Pour the Water, Transformative Solutions for Equity and Justice in Special Education. Add that. It references the Black Panther Party testimony with Judy Human. So it's beautiful to hear that you tell that story. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, no, and Marcy, if you'll put that, are you able to put that in the chat for us, the title of the book?
Yes, I will.
That would be really helpful. And then that can be available to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I found your comment here, Marcy, earlier. Pour the Water, Transformative Solutions for Equity and Justice in Special Education, correct?
I think that's what she said.
Correct. Yes.
All right, I'm going to put that in the chat for everyone. There you go.
Okay, we're getting lots of good resources. So so I know there may be one. Is there just one other raised hand, Gabe?
I see Paulette and Marcy still have their raised hands. Let me know if you guys had other questions. Oh, nope, that's the lowered hand.
Okay,
And
okay, good.
two
So
lowered hands. Oh,
so we can go back to the chat.
We just had another raised hand just come up right now.
Oh, okay.
Robert Wendt, one moment, please. I apologize if I mispronounced your last name, but one moment, please. We'll allow you to unmute your microphone. Okay, you can unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for doing the presentation. It brought back a lot of memories. My question had to do, and it was just touched on, the intersectionality between persons with disabilities and their interaction with the law enforcement. I think it's a nice way of saying it. There seems to be a lot of problems there, and I'm wondering if there are resources, ideas, things that we can do if we're on the advocacy side to improve that.
Well, great question, Robert. Sonia, did you want to go first?
Yeah, I think that part of something that we're having to do as a society is think about our punitive system and specifically policing, as you're talking about. And I think something that comes up a lot about that is when to use force, and also repeating this again, but training. So understanding how to de-escalate a situation is really important. And so I would say something that's advocates are trying to push for those things. So more training on de-escalation and when to use force, so that people can really people in law enforcement can really understand the disabled community's perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there are people that are doing training and writing in this area. So, trying to put them in Google, might be helpful. To talk about and talk to your local law enforcement if they'll talk to you. Talk to the folks in corrections and law enforcement in your community.
Yeah, and I know
Yeah.
that There's also some nonviolent like response teams that are starting to pop up around the country. So do some research on where near you is those nonviolent response teams, and you can learn a bit more about that.
Yeah, my city happens to have that, which I'm fortunate for. But the other thing here really is, I belong to an organization. We were doing some looking at some legislation, and one of the problems we had is documentation in the data. They don't always identify people who have disabilities, and so it's really hard to get really accurate information about what the percentage encounters are with persons who might have a disability.
That's true. That's true. So, yeah. So, basically, the data question is a question that crosses every single topic. It's
Yes.
often hard to get data about disabilities, full stop. Okay, for almost anything. So I hear you on that. So thank you for raising those issues. And I think before we wrap up here, we might go back to the chat just a little bit more. Sorry about if other people have your hands raised, but thank you for everybody who chimed in on unmuting. And so, Gabe, do we have some more in the chat?
Yes, give me one moment. Let me find my place again. Let me see. We had a question here. Well, it's more of a comment, just asking because they wanted both of your speakers to reiterate that going to local legislators is one of the easiest and fastest ways to continue uh, being part of the disability justice movement. And if you had more comments about that.
Well, and I would just say work with your local independent living centers and other disability rights organizations to go to your capital and your county board of supervisors or whatever you call them. Go to the meetings, go to the capital, do protests, ask for meetings, all of those things. But often it's better if you can have at least a few people with you to do those.
Thank you. Another question that we have here um, is in regards to physicians and medical professionals. If there's been any movement in training physicians about disability issues during their time in medical school or internships, if you know anything about that.
Well, there is a movement that is trying to do that more. There are movements across different kind of professional areas. There's a movement to require that architects be trained about physical access in architectural schools. There's a movement to train more doctors. I will tell you that Stanford University has a really robust, disability community for doctors and nurses and medical professionals. I would really encourage you to look up Stanford and what they're doing to educate their medical professionals, their nurses, their therapists, et cetera. And they're kind of a model, but I know there are others across the country who are doing that, but I'm not exactly sure I can name all of them, but certainly there is an effort to actually require more education at the school level of nurses, therapists, doctors, dentists, everyone who is a medical professional about disability awareness and about how to work with people with disabilities in healthcare. And I just wanted to also say that remember to follow us and sign up for our email list because we do healthcare in the ADA webinars regularly as well, and those are free. So come listen to those as well.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed getting some book suggestions, you can also follow us at Pacific ADA on Instagram, and we have some more suggestions or people you can learn about there.
So I think we're about to wrap up. Is there one last question that you see we need to address, Gabe?
Not a question, but I saw this pop up several times while going through the chat, and I just wanted to highlight it. Quite a bit of our audience wanted to commend you, Sonia, on your presentation here today. They are very excited to see up and coming people fighting the good fight, and very much looking forward to seeing your name in the future.
Yeah, and I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Jan, we did this together, so I really appreciated that help, and I really believe in the work that the Pacific ADA is doing. So again, email us, or repeating what we are on Instagram, Pacific ADA on Instagram, so you can follow our social media to keep in contact with us or come to future webinars.
Yeah, and I totally agree that Sonia is awesome, well beyond her years, and so we have really appreciated having her as our intern. And she just thinks she's ending her internship, but she's going to stay connected with the Pacific ADA Center. So so she'll never move away too far from us. So thank you for commending her. She deserves that. Thank you. And thank you to Gabe for helping us do this whole thing today. It's not easy to go through all these questions and everything. Thank you, Gabe, as well, and to our interpreters and captioners as well.
Of course.
So I think we can wrap up here. I think we're at the bottom of the hour, and really, really appreciate everyone joining us and appreciate all the participation. The participation was awesome today, and we love that. So thank you for doing that.
And if we were unable to answer your question, please email us.
Yeah, absolutely. Or call us. Okay, so I want to make sure I save the chat before